The year was 1892. The location was Curve, Tennessee. There, a white grocer named William Barnett was angry. His grocery business was dwindling due to the success of the People's Grocery, a store owned by three black men, Tommy Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. In order to prevent the further shrinking of Barnett's business, a white mob took justice into their own hands and stormed into the black-owned grocery store.
Under false pretenses, one being rape, the mob forcefully arrested the black owners. 3 days after their arrest, another white mob dragged Moss, McDowell, and Stewart from the county jail and led them to a railroad yard. There, the three black men were shot point blank, lynched, and left piled upon one another underneath a tree.
The white mob walked away that day thinking that they would never hear of this event again. However, that wasn't the case because Ida B. Wells would never let them forget. This event acted as a catalyst for Ida's transformation into the legendary anti-lynching crusader. Ida Bell Wells was born into slavery on July 16, 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi, shortly before emancipation. She came from a background that valued advocating for the rights of black Americans. She grew up during Reconstruction and saw her father, along with other black men, voting for black representatives that would fight for their rights.
Her father studied at Rust College, and she was also educated there until she was kicked out after disputing with the president of the college. In 1878, Wells discovered that her younger brother and her parents died from yellow fever while she was visiting her grandmother in the Mississippi Valley. This tragic loss made her, at age 16, the primary caregiver of her 5 siblings. She lied about her age and got a job as a teacher at a black elementary school. She used weekends to finish her high school education. While working this job, she saw the economic disparity between black Americans and white Americans. Black teachers were paid only $30 per month, while white teachers were paid $80 per month. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 was nullified by the Supreme Court, paving the way for Jim Crow laws, which gave rise to this wage disparity.
Wells wasn't afraid to stand up for herself in a world where she was constantly belittled due to her race and gender. In 1884, Wells bought a ticket in the first-class section of a train. During the ride, she was asked to give up her seat in the white woman's section to sit in the colored-only car, aka the smoking car. After she refused, she was forcefully removed. In her autobiography, Wells described her removal. The white conductor tried to drag me out of the seat, but the moment he caught hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth into the back of his hand.
Knowing her rights, Wells sued the train car company on the grounds of unfair treatment. Eventually, Wells won the case along with a $500 award. However, this victory didn't last long. The Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the ruling in 1887. This injustice gave rise to Wells's career in journalism. She began using her pseudonym, Lola, to express her disappointment with the injustice black Americans faced, focusing on the substandard education of black and Native American children. Wells advocated for black Americans to boycott trains. She traveled to Britain to advocate for her cause and asked British businessmen to stop buying American cotton. In 1892, she became an owner of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight, where she continued to publish articles condemning the injustices.
1892, the same year the aforementioned lynching of Thomas Moss and 2 other black men occurred. Thomas Moss was friends with Ida B. Wells. The two were close. She was the godmother of his child. Wells was out of town the day the lynchings occurred. When she learned of the situation, Wells couldn't believe that a well-liked man, a favorite with everybody, a model black citizen, was murdered with no more consideration than if he had been a dog. Wells published an expose in her newspaper condemning the act and bringing to light the atrocities committed against black Americans in the United States. Her editorial elicited rage. A white mob burned down her newspaper office and destroyed the printing press. Wells moved her family to Memphis, Tennessee to escape the violence. She believed that it didn't matter if a person was well-educated or middle class or successful in business. The racist white Americans would never see the person for more than his or her black skin. In an editorial she wrote, "There is therefore only one thing left that we can do. save our money, and leave a town which will neither protect our lives and property nor give us a fair trial in the courts, but takes us out and murders us in cold blood when accused by white persons."
Thus began her famous crusade on lynching. Lynchings were a method of social and racial control meant to terrorize Black Americans into submission and into an inferior racial caste position. They became widely practiced in the South, roughly from 1877, the end of post-Civil War Reconstruction, through 1950. Wells traveled across the South, documenting lynchings, interviewing eyewitnesses, and digging up records.
Her purpose was to disprove the myth that Black men deserved to be lynched because they raped white women. Wells found that of the 1,115 Negro men, women, and children hanged, shot, and roasted alive from January 1st, 1882 to January 1st, 1894, only 348 of that number were charged with rape. Nearly 700 of these persons were lynched for any other reason which could be manufactured by a mob wishing to indulge in a lynching bee.
There were no basis for the claim of rape. Negroes were whipped, scourged, exiled, shot, and hung whenever and wherever it pleased the white man so to treat them. So the murderers invented the excuse that Negroes had to be killed to avenge their assaults upon women, an excerpt from the Red Record written by Ida B. Wells. Wells found out that a majority of rape accusations were based in consensual interracial relationships. The white women or men in these relationships were often afraid to admit that they were involved with a Black person.
Wells never stopped publishing books and articles exposing racial violence in the South. She frequently questioned close friends and other activists who she felt weren't as dedicated to the cause as she was. The one person she never questioned was her husband, Fernand Barnett, a civil rights lawyer. They married in 1865. He respected her feminist values and never prevented her from speaking her mind. He encouraged it. Barnett chose his wife's activism over his career, often staying home with their 4 children while she went off to her speaking engagements. Later on in her life, Wells was replaced by W.E.B. Du Bois, who she mentored, and Booker T. Washington, because many people were trying to distance themselves from her radical tactics. Nevertheless, she went on to become a founding member of the NAACP, the Ida B. Wells Club, and the NACW Club, the National Association for Colored Women Club.
Wells withdrew herself from the NAACP because of its white and elite Black leadership and the scarcity of action-based initiatives. She used the NACW Club to advocate for women's suffrage and civil rights. Although she was very involved in the women's suffrage movement, Wells was written out of the movement due to her race. She actively called out many women's suffrage organizations for their indifference and their reaction to the inequality Black Americans faced. She was ridiculed for her stances and often ostracized for her views.
Towards the end of her life, Wells ran for Illinois State Senate and ended up losing badly. After this loss, she turned her focus to incarceration, becoming a probation officer for a short time. Ida Bell Wells Barnett died on March 25, 1931 from kidney disease at the age of 68, a few days after the passing of her husband.
Unfortunately, many of Wells' achievements aren't well known due to her race and gender.
Ida Bell Wells was a trailblazer in every sense of the word. She was an anti-lynching activist, a civil rights leader, a pioneering journalist, a feminist, and a suffragist.
Across the board, she was an amazing Black woman.